So let's do a quick little experimental project here. We're going to take West Systems 105 epoxy resin and 205 fast hardener. We're going to mix it up in some of these little cups. These are sort of like lightweight Tupperware cups. And again, when the resin solidifies in here, you can pop it back out and use these a bunch of different times. And we're going to coat this piece of wood to prevent water from getting into the top of it. And then we're going to take this little piece of wood and we're going to bond it to it. So first thing we want to do is to put on gloves because we're going to be extra safe. So now we're going to install our mini pumps. This model for the big can, make sure it extends all the way to the bottom. It's got sort of an adjustment here at the bottom which allows you to get all the way down in there. It's about right. And remember the golden rule of using West Systems, one pump here, one pump here. Now you need to purge the air out of the mini pumps before you start. So I'm going to take some very small pumps here until it just begins to come out of the pump. I can feel the resistance right there. Get the first little drop, I stop pumping. I'll do the same thing with the hardener. Just until you want to get all the air out. Okay. So I've got a little extra in there. So now I'm going to put, I think this is probably a 2 squirt job. So I'll take 1 squirt here. Actually, that's quite a bit of resin. Let's put in a little bit more. And 1 squirt here, or 2 squirts here. Okay, so this is my unmixed but catalyzed resin mixture. Now I'm going to take one of the little mixing sticks and mix this thoroughly. It's a good idea to give yourself a minute or two to do this. It's easy to sort of stop halfway and think that you're done, but you want to be very careful. So one of the things I'm doing is scraping around the outside to make sure that I get all of it incorporated. Okay, I've got all of the resin and hardener incorporated, and now I'm going to coat this surface. To do that, I'm going to use one of these roller covers, but I'm going to cut it up into thirds. So I can take a sharp knife and there's about 1/3 of the roller cover. So what I've done is I've created a little piece of brush surface that I can hold in my fingertips and draw across the surface. One last little stir to make sure. Now I'm going to pour it over my piece of wood. And I can use either a disposable foam brush or I can use my little handy brush here. And now I can start to pull this out and coat the surface. In almost any West Systems project, you start with unthickened epoxy to make sure that you get good absorption into the surface. Now I can take long swipes at this. Now I don't know if you can see it, but it's slowly starting to soak in and it's nicely covered, got a nice uniform gloss to it. It'll of course start to absorb. I may want to put a second coat later. It depends on what I want to do with this. There are 2 methods of recoating West Systems epoxy. There's the wet on wet method or there's the post-cure method. If you're doing it wet on wet, while the epoxy is still tacky, you can go over it with a second coat or a third coat and keep on building up the millage on the surface. If you let the epoxy dry entirely, it gets what's called an amine blush. The amine blush is sort of a sticky, slippery material that gets on the top of it, and you have to wash that off with a little soap and water, maybe using something like a Scotch-Brite pad. You can also sand it, but you ought to wash it first because it gums up your sandpaper. So using wet on wet to get thickness is a good idea. I'm going to pull this a little bit more just to make sure I don't have any holidays on my project. So if I leave this out in the California sun, this will take probably an hour and a half or 2 hours to cure. It'll go through sort of a gelled consistency for a while, and then it'll get just a little sticky, but you really can't depress your thumbnail into it, and then finally it'll get very, very, very hard. Now to compress our time a little bit, I'm going to use this same resin mixture and I'm going to make a filleting blend so that we can bond this other piece of wood to it. Normally we'd let this cure, or we'd at least be doing this wet on wet, but I'm going to speed things up a little bit. To do that, I'm going to thicken this epoxy, and I'm going to use, let's try using the filleting blend for our choice of thickener today. So we're going to incorporate the filleting blend into the resin mixture, and just for convenience, I'm going to use this little stirring stick as a spoon to put it in there. This is very low density stuff. You can see that it's sort of floating off. Mix this up. Now I can mix this at a number of different consistencies. I'm going to use this as a gap filler initially, so I want it fairly liquid. And once again, you can use the shape of the stirring stick to go around the outside of the container and get all of that resin mixture and all of the unincorporated material in the solution. Now I'm going to put this on my piece of wood to be bonded, like that. And I can push it in place. Now, if I push too hard, I'll get resin starvation, where I won't have enough material between the two pieces. So I don't want to push it down so hard that I actually squeeze everything out of it. So I have to leave, a couple of thousandths for the resin to soak in. And now finally, I'm going to add a little bit more filleting blend, and I make this into a thicker material so that I can put a fillet around the bottom. So now I can take this very thick mixture and use it as a fillet between the two pieces of wood. It's always easier to scrape off the uncured epoxy before it cures. If you put it on and you leave little bumps and scratches, you're going to have to spend an awful lot of time sanding it. And especially when you're using these harder compounds, it takes a long time. So you want to leave as clean a surface as possible. Incidentally, I probably would have bonded this, let it completely cure, and do things in a completely different way if we weren't pressed for time. But I'm giving you an idea of the versatility of the West Systems epoxy system. By using the different angles of the mixing stick, I can actually keep the concave surface there, and I can scrape all the extra epoxy out of the area and leave a very clean surface. So you can see that the fillet has allowed me to increase the size of the glue bond, and it gives me more radius, so this will be a much stronger structural component when I'm done. Only takes a few seconds, and obviously you can vary the consistency so that it'll stay right in place. I'll let this dry, and this will be an extremely strong structural piece. In fact, if I try to break this wood free from the surface, it's likely it'll break the wood before it'll break the bond. I hope this simple explanation has given you some insights into the various kinds of projects you can do with West Systems. It's really versatile. It doesn't go bad in the can. It stays liquid and ready to use for years. It's easy to modify its properties, and it's easy to apply using these application tools. It's the universal product if you want to run a fleet of juniors, or repair an old sailboat or powerboat, or if you want to coat something so that water doesn't damage the wood. Well, thanks for watching. This is one of the West Marine Project Series videos, and we hope you've learned something from this, and we'll see you on the water.